I will never forget that day, 16 years ago. They said I was bad luck. At my son's company celebration, his wife looked me in the eye and told everyone I was the reason for every failure in their life, and my son stayed silent. That night, I was handed a letter that banned me from every family event. No birthdays, no Christmas, no phone calls, only silence. But now, they are here at the gates of my new mansion, smiling like they never banished me. Should I open the door, or should I open the past? I will never forget that day, 16 years ago. They said I was bad luck. At my son's company celebration, his wife stood up, looked me straight in the eye, and told the entire room I had cursed their life with failure. And my son said nothing. That night, they handed me a letter, neatly folded, printed, and signed, stating that I was no longer welcome at any family event. I still remember the weight of the envelope, heavier than any silence I had ever carried. Since then, there had been no birthdays, no holidays, no phone calls. I went through surgery alone. I moved apartments alone. I turned 71, alone. And I learned to be fine with that. But this morning, as I stood in the doorway of my new home, I saw the past walking up the curved gravel driveway in beige loafers and borrowed smiles. Howard, Denise, and between them, Sophie. They had not called, not texted, not even sent a card when I moved into Elmsworth Drive, but they must have seen the deed transfer in the paper. They always did have a soft spot for headlines. I stayed still, watching them approach through the long security camera feed. I had the monitor set up in the kitchen, right above the sink. The screen was grainy but clear enough. I could see Denise smoothing her jacket, the way she always did when she was about to lie. Howard kept adjusting his collar. His nervous habit never left him. And Sophie, taller now, older, looked like she had no idea where she was being taken. It had been 16 years since I last saw her. She was barely a toddler the last time I held her. Now she stood at the gate of my new life, looking like a stranger carrying my blood. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood by the window for a while, just long enough to let the silence do its work. Then I picked up the intercom, pressed the button for the front gate, and said, "Come on in." My voice was even, no warmth, no anger, just enough civility to sound human. They walked in slowly, like guests unsure of the rules. The foyer of my home was built to impress. High ceilings, marble floors, a chandelier I chose for its silence when it moved. I made sure everything in this house could be admired in quiet. Howard looked around, eyes scanning the archways, the staircase, the paintings. Denise smiled a little too wide. "You've done well, Mum." I didn't respond. I simply motioned them into the sitting room. The house was spotless, as always. The morning light stretched across the rug, touching the edge of the dark velvet chairs I had ordered from Savannah. Everything in this house was mine. Bought, paid, earned. They sat down hesitantly. Denise crossed her legs, then uncrossed them. Sophie stayed standing near the fireplace, looking at a framed photo of me in my garden. I remained standing. So, they were here, and now the silence belonged to me. "You came to see the house," I said finally. "Or did you come to remember what you gave up?" Howard cleared his throat, then looked at Denise. She looked at Sophie. No one said a word. I walked over to the cabinet and pressed a small button beneath the second drawer. The screen in the corner of the room lit up. I had it preloaded. I had been ready for this moment since I saw the headlines flip. The recording played, "A quiet video, low resolution, from 16 years ago." Denise standing at the banquet table, shouting. Howard beside her, silent. A printed letter passed across a white tablecloth, the words still loud enough to sting. You are not welcome in our home anymore. I didn't look at them while it played. I watched Sophie. Her mouth dropped slightly. She turned to her parents. No one spoke. When the video ended, I turned off the screen and walked to the window. You were very clear back then, I said. Now I want to be just as clear. This house is not a symbol. It is not an invitation. It is the life I built when I had nothing left to lose. And you are standing on land you don't belong to anymore. If you've ever been cast out by your own, only to rise higher than they ever imagined, you'll understand this silence. It is not revenge. It is reckoning. And it has only just begun. I did not ask them why they came. That was their burden to carry. Mine was heavier, but clearer. I had waited 16 years to see if they would remember the weight of the words they used. And now, I would let those words speak for themselves. Howard looked like he wanted to say something, but Denise beat him to it. We've grown. We've changed. We thought maybe this could be the start of... Her voice trailed off when she saw me walk to the small drawer beside the bookshelf. It clicked open. I reached in slowly and took out an envelope. The paper had softened over the years, but the ink remained bold. I did not need to look at it again. I had memorized every line, even the signature, especially the signature. I walked across the room and placed it gently on the coffee table, between the untouched glasses of water I had set earlier. Howard stared at it, but did not reach for it. You recognize it, I said. He nodded once, slow and ashamed. Denise turned her face away. It was short. 4 paragraphs, typed in Calibri, signed by both of them. A ban, a formal dismissal. It had no warmth, no confusion. It was deliberate. Denise cleared her throat and tried to smile. That was a long time ago. We all say things when emotions run high. No, I stopped her there. You wrote things. You printed them. You signed them. That's not emotion. That's intention. Denise's jaw clenched. Howard looked down at the floor. I stood still for a moment, then stepped over to the audio console hidden inside the cabinet. It had taken me years to find the old recorder. It was buried in a shoebox, behind dusty photo albums, beneath a rusted space heater I never threw away. And when I found it, the battery was dead. But the file was still there. Their voices. Clear as the day, they turned me into a stranger. I pressed play. The sound that came out was unmistakable. Laughter in the background, the clink of glasses, a faint murmur of a piano. Then Denise, sharp and direct. We cannot keep her around. She drags this family down. Everything starts going wrong when she's here. Every time. Howard, quieter, hesitant. Maybe we talk to her first. Give her time. Denise again. No, she'll spin it. You know she will. She makes herself the victim in everything. Just do it. Sign the letter. Get your spine back. A rustling sound. Then the scrape of a pen. Silence. I turned off the recording. No one moved. I did not say a word right away. I let the quiet do what it was meant to do. Finally, Denise stood up. That's a private conversation. You had no right to record it. I turned to her, steady and calm. It wasn't private. It was on my property, in my kitchen, at my table. The only thing private was the cruelty, and now it isn't. Howard sank back into the chair, his face pale, his hands shaking. I watched them both without blinking. 16 years ago you made a decision. Now you will sit through the result of it. They stayed silent. I could see the edges cracking. Denise's cool exterior was flaking off. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for control, a way back into the narrative. Howard had none to offer. He was a passenger, then and now. Sophie had not sat down. She stood at the far end of the room, near the entryway to the sunroom, her arms folded tight across her chest. Her eyes, though young, held a quiet confusion. She had never heard that voice in her parents. Not like that. And now she had. I walked over and picked up the envelope again. I handed it to Howard. "You don't need to read it, but you will hold it." He took it, hands trembling. No words. I stepped back. "You came here with expectations. Let me adjust them for you. This is not a place of welcome. This is the evidence room. You wanted to remember who I was. Now you know who I am." They did not respond. I gave them nothing else. Not pity, not anger, not warmth. Only what they had earned. The truth, spoken plainly, and finally returned. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, where the coffee had gone cold. Behind me, the room remained silent, exactly as I needed it to be. The envelope still sat on the coffee table when I returned with my cup of cold coffee. No one had touched it. Not Howard, not Denise. Sophie had stepped further into the sunroom, half in shadow, arms still folded. I took my seat across from them. My fingers curled gently around the porcelain handle. I didn't sip. I didn't need to. What needed to be said had already been said. Now the past had its turn. The silence lingered, but it was no longer heavy. It was sharp. It cut where it needed to. And I let it. 16 years ago, the last thing I saw before I left their house was the flicker of the porch light through my tears. They had planned it all so cleanly. The gathering had ended, guests were leaving, people were laughing, hugging, drunk on wine and comfort. And I had stayed behind to help clean up, as I always did. I was wiping down the kitchen counter when Denise came in, holding a glass of red and a folded paper. Her eyes were calm, too calm. The kind that comes right before something cold is about to be done. She placed the glass on the counter, then laid the paper down. I remember asking her what it was, though I already knew it was not a thank you card. She didn't answer. Howard came in a moment later, his face stiff, avoiding mine. His eyes stayed on the floor like the answer was hidden in the tile grout. I picked up the paper. 4 paragraphs. The first stated their appreciation for my support. The second moved into their need for independence. The third called me a source of conflict. The last one ended with a firm boundary that I not attend future family events until further notice, effective immediately. There was no space for reply. There was no space for dignity. I asked them both if this was a mistake. Howard said nothing. Denise walked away. It started raining as I stepped out. I had no umbrella, no ride, just my coat and my purse. It was mid-October, and the wind had already started to bite. I stood at the edge of the driveway for a long time, not because I didn't know where to go, but because I didn't know what just happened. I was no longer part of their version of family, and no one had fought to keep me there. The first night, I checked into a small motor lodge near the train station, the kind with buzzing fluorescent lights and towels so thin they might as well be napkins. I paid for 3 nights in advance with what was left in my savings account. $1,218. That was the number I kept whispering to myself. It was what I had to work with. It was what they left me with. For the next few days, I stayed inside, only going out for coffee and job listings. At 65, no one was looking to hire women like me, but I had managed books at the hospital for over 20 years. I knew how to read numbers better than people, and I trusted numbers more anyway. A week later, I found a part-time position with a small clinic. 4 days a week, $12 an hour. I took it, grateful, ashamed. I did not cry at night, not because I wasn't broken, but because I didn't want to fall apart somewhere that smelled like bleach and mildew. By the end of that first month, I had enough to pay rent on a tiny apartment above a closed-down hair salon. It had one window, a stove that clicked twice before lighting, a refrigerator with a dent the size of a bowling ball. But it was mine. No one could tell me I didn't belong. No one could sign a letter to evict me from my own breath. In that apartment, I started again. Not because I was strong, but because there was no other choice. I took on more hours at the clinic, then picked up weekend work doing data entry for a local therapist. Cash only. Quiet. No questions. Eventually, I met Eleanor again. She had once worked in the legal department at the hospital. We bumped into each other at a pharmacy. She was surprised to see me. I pretended to be fine. She didn't believe me. She took me to lunch the next day, and I told her everything. She didn't offer pity. She offered options. She helped me set up an LLC, encouraged me to consult privately for small medical practices. It started slow. A few spreadsheets here, a payroll system there. But it grew. I reinvested every dollar, bought nothing new, used the same coat for 5 winters, no vacations, no luxuries, only momentum. By year 3, I had 6 regular clients and a waiting list. And by year 5, I bought my first property, a small duplex in a quiet neighborhood. I rented the bottom unit and lived in the top. There were no parties, no toasts, just paperwork, numbers, peace. When I think back to that rainy night, I do not remember the rain. I remember the weight of the door closing, the way it didn't slam but sealed. It was final, and it freed me. Now, 16 years later, they were sitting in my house, on my chairs, trying to rewrite what they had so clearly ended. But I had no desire to rewrite anything. I was only here to return what belonged to them, their words, their actions, their silence. They gave me exile, and I turned it into empire. The room stayed still. I leaned forward slightly, letting the edge of my voice sharpen. You thought I disappeared. I didn't. I just stopped waiting to be welcomed. I closed the door behind them without a word. No goodbye, no threat, just the sound of a latch clicking into place. That was all the closure I needed for the moment. Howard and Denise had walked back down the stone path toward the gate, their backs a little lower than when they arrived. Sophie glanced back once, but I did not wave. There was nothing to wave at yet. I stood in the foyer for a while after the door closed. My hand still rested on the knob. The silence was welcome. For the first time since I moved in, the house felt completely mine. Then I turned, walked straight to the study, and picked up the phone. The number was already saved. It only rang once. Eleanor's voice came through clear and steady. I told her they had come, that I had shown them just enough, that it was time. She didn't ask for the details. She just said, "I'll be there tomorrow at 10. I trusted Eleanor because she never asked unnecessary questions. She only dealt in actions. She had been that way since the day we reconnected, years ago at the pharmacy. Back then, I was still wearing the same coat from the year I was thrown out. I had a small binder tucked under my arm with invoices and spreadsheets, and she was the only person who looked me in the eye and saw a woman, not a charity case. The next morning, she arrived exactly at 10. Grey slacks, crisp blouse, leather folder in hand, no small talk, just straight to the table. I had already cleared the sunroom, the brightest spot in the house, and laid out all relevant documents. deed, purchase history, personal financial records, all lined up, all in order. She spent 20 minutes reviewing without a single sound. Then she gave a firm nod. Everything here is traceable and clean. That's good. It means we can be as public as we want without blowback. That was the first step. We talked through the plan over coffee. It was not a long meeting, but it was thorough. Eleanor didn't believe in overcomplicating justice. She believed in documenting it. The goal was never to humiliate for the sake of ego. It was to remove denial, cleanly, legally, permanently. Once we finished, she handed me a typed list. 3 names, 3 people to contact before the weekend. Reverend Thomas Clark, Mr. Benjamin Alvarez, a name from the past, a name from the bank, and a name from the community. All necessary, all willing. I started with Reverend Clark. He was older now. His hair was white and thin, but his voice hadn't lost its clarity. He remembered everything. The night of the company event, the cold way I was removed. He told me he had felt ashamed for not speaking up back then. Now, he said, he would. He agreed to attend the gathering I was planning. He didn't need coaching. He had seen it. That was enough. Next was Mr. Alvarez. He was not a man who gave second chances easily, but he respected paperwork. Years ago, he had been the one to approve the loan for Howard and Denise's current home. And just last month, he had been the one to sign off on the bank's internal decision to begin foreclosure due to long-standing missed payments. When I called him, I did not disguise my purpose. I told him I needed him to confirm 2 things, on record and in person: that I was the legal owner of Elmsworth Drive, and that the house Howard and Denise were living in had been flagged for foreclosure. He agreed, without hesitation. I could hear the low tone of finality in his voice when he said, "It's time some people learned how consequences work." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The puzzle was coming together. Every person had a role, every moment had weight. There would be no chaos, only precision. Over the next 48 hours, I arranged the logistics. The invitations were sent out. No frills, no promises. Just a simple card printed on cream stock. You are invited to an open house at Elmsworth Drive. Saturday, 4 p.m. I did not name the reason. I did not mention family. Those who needed to come would come. By Friday night, I had finished the layout. The foyer would be clear. The sitting room arranged for conversation. The audio system rechecked. The video display tested. The hallway cleaned. The stairs polished. This was not a party. It was a presentation. Saturday morning arrived quietly. I woke early. The sun had just touched the garden walls. I made tea instead of coffee, the kind I used to make on holidays, back when holidays had meant something. As I poured it, I thought about timing. Howard and Denise had always been very punctual, even in cruelty. I expected them by 3:45. That would give them 15 minutes to wander the foyer before the others arrived. And as for Sophie, I had not reached out to her directly. I left that door open on purpose. She would come on her own if she needed to, if she was ready to hear what had been kept from her. I stood in the middle of the sitting room at noon and looked around. Everything was in place. Eleanor would arrive first, Reverend Clark second, Mr. Alvarez third, each with their role, each bringing truth that no one could argue with. I had not scripted anything. I had not rehearsed. The truth did not need a script. It only needed a stage. And I had built one room by room, brick by brick, year by year. After being cast out with nothing but a coat and a $1,000 bank account, they would come into this house, but they would not leave with what they came for. They came looking for softness. What they would find was clarity, the kind that did not scream, the kind that did not beg, the kind that simply showed up and stood its ground. It was time. At 3:30, I stood by the front window. The sky had softened to that pale afternoon shade just before it loses its blue. A slight breeze moved through the garden hedges, but the air held a certain stillness. They arrived on schedule. Howard pulled the car up slowly. A silver SUV. Clean. Too clean. The kind you rent when you want to appear stable. Denise stepped out first. She wore a light beige blazer, carefully pressed, with heels just high enough to feel confident. Her hair was straighter than I remembered, softer around the face, but the sharpness in her eyes hadn't dulled. It had only learned to smile. Howard walked around to the back seat. Sophie stepped out quietly. No blazer, no heels, just a simple blue dress and flats. Her shoulders moved differently, less certain. Her eyes scanned the house, then stopped on the windows. I remained still. Let them wonder. They came up the steps like a family out of a catalogue. Howard reached for the bell. I had already unlocked the door. It opened with a smooth swing. "Welcome back," I said. Denise gave a small laugh, just enough to sound warm. "The house is beautiful. You've done so well for yourself." I said nothing, only stepped aside. Howard murmured something about the garden. I let it drift into the air and disappear. Sophie offered a shy nod. No smile, just acknowledgement. I appreciated that. Inside, the entryway held the same quiet as it had earlier that morning. The space had not changed, only the people standing in it. They followed me into the sitting room. I had arranged the chairs deliberately. 3 on one side, 1 opposite. I gestured for them to sit together. They hesitated, then obeyed. Sophie chose the edge seat, her hands folded in her lap. Denise took the middle, adjusting her bracelet as she settled in. Howard kept looking at the carpet, as if trying to memorize its pattern. I sat across from them, not at an angle, not in a corner, direct. Denise leaned forward first. "We've been thinking about what you said the other day. It made us reflect. A lot." Howard nodded. Slow. Too slow. "We regret how things happened. Emotions were high back then. Life was stressful." Denise took over again. "We know we can't change the past, but maybe we can start fresh. Maybe there's still time for family." She reached over and placed her hand lightly on Sophie's arm. "Isn't that right, sweetheart?" Sophie looked at her, then at me. She said nothing. I turned to her gently. "Would you like something to drink?" She shook her head. I offered them nothing. Denise continued, her voice smoother now. "We talked to Sophie about spending more time with you. She's getting older, starting to ask questions." Howard added quickly. "And she's always been curious about you, about what happened." That was a lie. They had kept her at arm's length. 16 years of silence did not grow out of kindness. Sophie shifted in her seat. "Actually, I don't know much. They never really told me. I only heard you moved far away." Denise's smile flickered. "Well, we didn't want to confuse her when she was young. Kids need stability." Howard cleared his throat. "But now things are different." I held my gaze steady. "What's different is that I have built something without you, and now you want to enter it without explanation." Denise straightened. "We came to apologize. We didn't have to come." I leaned forward slightly. "You came because you saw the transfer notice in the paper. You came because you recognized the address." Howard tried to protest, but I stopped him with one look. "There was a time when you could have called. You didn't. There was a time when you could have sent a birthday card. You didn't." There was a time when you could have told her the truth. Sophie looked down, her fingers pressed into her palm. Denise recovered quickly. We made mistakes. Everyone does. But holding on to grudges, that doesn't help anyone. I smiled, not out of joy, out of understanding. This is not a grudge. This is structure. You broke something, and now you are sitting inside the house of the woman you left on the curb. There was a long pause. Denise looked around the room, her eyes scanning the paintings, the books, the polished wood. Howard looked anywhere but at me. Sophie kept her eyes on her knees. You built all this alone, she finally said. Yes. She gave a small laugh. Well, that's impressive, but it doesn't have to stay lonely. That's when I stood up. There was no need for argument. They would speak their lines, I would speak mine, and the facts would do the rest. I turned towards Sophie. You are welcome here when you choose to come. No pressure, no explanation required. Sophie met my eyes. She did not blink. Then I turned back to the others. But the rest of this house is mine. Every corner, every memory, every inch of silence I earned. Howard looked tired. His hands rested on his thighs, limp. Denise stared at me like she was still waiting for a shift, a crack, an opening. There was none. I stepped aside. The other guests will arrive soon. You're welcome to stay and listen. Howard stood first. Denise followed. Sophie remained seated for a moment longer, then rose quietly. As they walked out, she turned one more time. Her eyes lingered on the photo near the hallway, the one of her as a baby in my arms. She said nothing, but she looked long, and I knew that look. The door closed behind them, and the house held its breath. But not for long. The real weight was still on its way. By 4 o'clock, the sitting room was full. Not crowded, but full. The kind of full that happens when people sense something is about to happen, but no one quite says it out loud. I had counted on that. The invitations had been plain. There was no promise of speeches, no mention of drama, just a gathering, a gesture of warmth. That was all it took. People always filled in the blanks with their own imagination, especially in this town. The chairs were arranged in a wide semicircle facing the large wall-mounted screen above the fireplace. Light poured in from the tall windows. Soft music played in the background. Not loud enough to distract, just enough to settle the air. Eleanor arrived early, as planned. She stood near the entry, her posture relaxed but alert. She had always had the quiet presence of someone who knew where every escape was, even in a room with no doors. Mr. Alvarez arrived just after her. He greeted no one with more than a nod. His suit was tailored, his shoes shined, his expression neutral. He took a seat near the back, but still within view of everything. I didn't need him to say anything yet. His presence was the first part of the setup. Reverend Thomas walked in at 4:15. His gait was slower than before, but his voice was unchanged. He wore a plain, dark suit and carried no notes. I greeted him quietly. He gave me a firm pat on the shoulder. Then he stepped to the center of the room. The music stopped. The room adjusted. Attention found its focus. He stood tall, both hands lightly resting in front of him. "Thank you for having me here," he began. "Some of you know me, some of you don't. That's fine. I'm not here to be remembered. I'm here because I remember." He paused. 16 years ago, I was present at a private family event. It was meant to be a celebration. What I witnessed was not. There were no gasps, no whispers, just stillness. He continued. I watched a mother be shamed, not by strangers, not by enemies, but by her own. I saw her leave in the rain while others pretended not to notice. and I said nothing. He looked directly at Howard and Denise, who were seated 2 rows back. Howard's hands were clenched together, knuckles pale. Denise sat straight, jaw tight. Reverend Thomas spoke again. I said nothing because I thought silence was neutral, but silence is never neutral. Silence sides with the one who speaks last, and that day, cruelty spoke last. He stepped back, nodded toward me, and returned to his seat. The room shifted. The balance changed. What had been suggestion was now testimony. I moved to the front. My hands were steady, my voice clear. Thank you, Reverend. I would like to share something now. A brief moment from that night, just to help us all remember what silence sounded like when it wasn't ours. I walked to the side of the room, picked up the remote, and turned to the screen. The video had been cleaned up, but not edited. I had made that decision carefully. The rawness needed to stay. The screen flickered to life. A faint graininess filled the picture. Then the audio came in. Howard's living room. People laughing in the background. The edge of a buffet table in view. Denise's voice sharp and unfiltered. We need her gone. She's bad for us. Bad luck. Every time she stays with us, something goes wrong. Howard's voice followed. Maybe we talk to her first. Give her time. Denise again. No, that's weak. Just sign the letter. We need space. She needs to stop pretending this is her place. A pause, a pen scratching. Then silence. I stopped the video. No commentary, no added words. I turned to face the room. You've now heard what I heard. You've seen what I saw. You've sat in the quiet I've lived in. That silence is no longer mine to carry. I looked at Denise. Her expression had frozen into something unreadable, the kind of stillness that masks calculation, not confusion, not remorse, just delay. Howard looked down. He had not lifted his eyes once since the video began. I turned to Sophie. Her face had gone pale, not with fear, with clarity, the kind that comes when a shadow shifts and the shape beneath it is finally seen. I stepped back. No one needed to speak. The room had heard everything it needed. I let the silence stretch again, but this time it was mine by choice. The truth had landed, clean, cold, heavy. I looked to Eleanor. She gave the faintest nod. Part 1 was done. The next strike would not be emotional. It would be factual, public. But for now, I let the room sit with what it had heard. Not everyone would believe it, but they had heard it. And that was enough to make the next blow unmissable. The air in the room shifted the moment the video stopped. No one moved. The image lingered on the black screen for a few seconds longer before fading completely. I placed the remote down and stepped aside. Eleanor stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not clear her throat. She walked to the center of the room like someone who had been here before, not in this house, but in this kind of moment. She held a folder. Plain. Nothing fancy. Inside that folder was everything Howard and Denise had chosen to ignore for 16 years. She opened it. What you heard was one version of truth, words spoken and recorded. But words can be dismissed if people choose not to believe what they hear. She paused, then pulled out the first document. This is a certified copy of the property deed for Elmsworth Drive. Dated, signed, notarized, no liens, no disputes. Purchased outright by Mrs. Lillian Mercer with documented funds over the course of 9 years. She held it for a second longer before passing it to the first guest, seated near the aisle. He looked at it, then passed it to the next. She pulled out a second document. This is a summary of verified financial records, including annual earnings, property investments, and IRS returns filed under Mrs. Mercer's LLC. All clean, all transparent. The room stayed quiet, but heads began to nod. Something about paper being passed hand to hand always changes the energy. It grounds people, removes excuse. Then Eleanor paused. I also have one final document to present. And for this, I'd like to invite Mr. Alvarez to speak. She turned toward him. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, walked to the front like a man who didn't care if people liked what he had to say, only that they heard it. Good afternoon. He gave a short nod. No more. I am here in my capacity as Regional Loan Compliance Officer for Summit Bay Financial. I am not a family member. I am not a neighbor. I am a banker, which means I only speak when the numbers tell me to. He pulled a folded paper from his inside pocket and unfolded it. On June 12th of this year, our office filed a pre-foreclosure notice on the property located at 417 Briarwood Court. The mortgage associated with that address has been in delinquency for 185 days. He looked up. That property is listed under the names of Mr. Howard Mercer and Mrs. Denise Mercer. No payment arrangements have been made, no extensions granted. A ripple moved through the room. This is public record, he continued. Anyone can verify it. He handed the document to Eleanor, who took it silently. That concludes my role here today. Thank you. He turned, walked back to his seat, and crossed his legs with the ease of a man who had done his part. The silence returned, but it was no longer a silence of tension. It was a silence of recognition. The room was recalibrating. People who had come expecting one thing were now sitting in the truth of something else. Faces softened, others hardened, but no one stayed neutral. I stepped forward again. 16 years ago, I was asked to leave a home. Today, I have invited people into mine. There is no magic in that. No revenge, just correction. Denise looked at the floor. Howard stared blankly ahead. Sophie sat perfectly still, not hiding, not blinking. She had moved closer to Eleanor sometime during the exchange, just slightly, like instinct had pulled her toward steadiness. I turned to the room. Everything you've seen today is documented, not interpreted, not embellished, not dramatized. I do not expect agreement, but I will no longer allow confusion. This house was not given to me. It was built by me. Slowly, quietly, brick by brick. It was funded by spreadsheets and $10 lunches, by nights without heat, by weeks with no one to talk to but my own tired bones. No one carried me here. I crawled when I had to, and now that I stand alone. The crowd did not applaud. I hadn't wanted them to. I didn't build this moment for approval. I built it for clarity. Still, something changed. In the posture, in the tone. A woman near the back wiped under her eye. A man in the corner lowered his head. Even Reverend Thomas, who had seen more in his life than most, closed his eyes for a moment, as if giving a quiet nod to something invisible. I ended it there. No final statement, no grand exit. Just truth, placed plainly on the table and left there for everyone to see. Eleanor gave me a look. It was not a smile, but it held weight. Mr. Alvarez remained unreadable, which was exactly how he needed to be. Howard shifted in his chair but still said nothing. Denise crossed her arms tightly. Her face was a mask, one she had worn too long for anyone to remember what was underneath. Sophie's eyes never left me. The moment had landed. It had left a mark, and it was only the beginning. The room had not fully recovered from Mr. Alvarez's statement before the next wave began. The quiet hadn't settled. It was thin, taut, stretched over something coming. I had not planned this part, not directly, but the truth has a rhythm. When one piece lands, another follows. And once that door opens, it rarely shuts cleanly. At 4:52, the doorbell rang. I did not move. Eleanor stepped forward, quietly walked to the front entry, and opened it. A man in a plain grey suit stood there, a brown folder in hand. His badge visible, clipped to the inside of his coat. He did not step inside. He simply asked for Denise Mercer. His voice was steady, nothing performative, just procedure. Denise stood slowly, her eyes narrowed, her body stiff. Eleanor walked back to her seat. The man remained at the threshold. I watched from across the room as he handed her a sealed envelope. It was thick, certified, dated, labelled as a formal notice to appear. He offered no explanation, only confirmation of delivery. Denise took it without speaking. She turned slightly toward Howard, who stayed seated, motionless. The man nodded once and left without a word. The door closed. In the room, the shift was complete. Whatever sympathy Denise might have carried dissolved into air. The folded paper in her hand said more than she ever could. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The audience knew. A woman in the third row whispered to the man beside her. Someone near the window cleared their throat. A few looked down, embarrassed by proximity. I stayed where I was. There was no need to move, no need to explain. Denise sat again, this time with a different posture. She no longer crossed her legs. Her hands gripped the envelope like a handle she could twist and undo, but it would not untwist. Then it came. The first question. Not from me, not from Eleanor. From the room. A man near the side wall, someone I barely knew, raised his voice just enough. "Is it true, Howard?" No tone of cruelty, no mockery, just the blunt weight of recognition. Howard didn't answer. Another voice joined. About the gambling. Again, not hostile, just tired, like someone trying to confirm what they had suspected, but never dared ask. Howard finally looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. There was nothing left to deny. I saw it on his face. He wasn't shocked this happened. He was only shocked that it happened here, that I let it happen here. He stood up, slowly, but the damage was already moving faster than him. Denise remained seated, staring ahead. Her grip on the envelope had not loosened. Eleanor, without a word, placed another document on the table near the center of the room. She didn't read from it. Just let it sit there. The top page clearly titled in bold black font, "Notice of Investigation, Federal Tax Compliance Division." That was enough. No drama, no announcement, just ink on paper, witnessed by those who needed to see. It was never about punishment. It was about weight, letting every person in that room feel the slow descent of consequence. I said nothing. Howard spoke first. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't justify. He only said, "We made mistakes." Denise didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on a single spot on the rug. No one responded. The room was not interested in apology, only understanding, and that had already arrived. Mr. Alvarez stood, gave a short nod to Eleanor, then to me. Then he left. No speech, no follow-up. His part was done. He had delivered weight without ceremony. Reverend Thomas remained seated, his hands folded gently over his lap. He did not need to speak again. His silence now said enough. This silence was different. It was aligned. It did not hide anything. It simply held space. Howard sat back down, but this time he no longer sat beside Denise. He moved one chair over. Sophie had not spoken since the delivery, but her eyes stayed sharp. Her back stayed straight. She had seen everything, heard everything, and now she was choosing what to believe. I watched her, quietly. This moment wasn't for me. It was for her, to see that actions weren't just spoken. They landed. They stayed. And sometimes they waited years to be heard. The guests began to stir. A woman gathered her purse. A man checked his watch. But no one rushed. The mood had changed from expectation to reckoning. They had come curious. They were leaving clear. Denise finally folded the envelope, tucked it into her bag. Her hands smoothed her skirt as if she could erase the crease of what had just happened. But some marks do not smooth. They stay, pressed deep. I stood slowly, walked to the edge of the room. "Thank you for coming," I said. That was all. Some nodded, some mumbled soft goodbyes. Most just looked once more before leaving. By 5:20, the room was nearly empty. Eleanor stayed. Reverend stayed. Sophie stayed. Denise and Howard remained seated, not out of defiance, but because they had nowhere else to stand. The silence returned, but it no longer belonged to them. This time, it belonged to me. Sophie moved fast. No words, no coat, just motion. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she left the room, then faded into the stone tiles of the back hallway. The glass door to the garden made a dull thud as she pushed it open and stepped into the late afternoon cold. I waited. I waited for anyone else to follow, but no one did. Denise was still frozen in her chair. Howard had sunk so far into himself that he might as well have vanished. Eleanor met my eyes once. She gave a soft nod, no movement needed. She would hold the space inside. So I followed my granddaughter. Outside, the wind had picked up. Not harsh, but enough to rustle the dry leaves still clinging to the camellia hedge and stir the scent of rosemary along the stone path. My legs ached a little with each step, but I took my time. Let the rhythm of the garden steady me. Sophie was sitting on the old bench beside the bird bath. Her back was turned, arms wrapped around herself, shoulders trembling just enough to betray what she would not show inside. I didn't speak. Not yet. I walked quietly until I was close enough for her to hear my steps, but far enough to let her decide. I stood for a moment, then slowly sat down beside her. We didn't look at each other. Not right away. The garden had grown thick in the years I'd lived here. Eleanor helped me plant most of it, but it was the silence that did the rest. Silence helps things grow, just like water. Things people forget to say, things they bury. The soil holds it all. Sophie let out a long breath. It wasn't a sob. Not yet. Just the release of a thread she'd been holding too tight. She spoke first. "It's all real," she said. That wasn't a question. It was fact, landing heavy. I nodded, not because she needed confirmation, but because sometimes the body needs a gesture more than the mind needs a sentence. She looked at me. There were no tears on her cheeks yet, but her eyes shimmered with the weight of every revelation she had just swallowed whole. "They always said you were unstable." I let the sentence float between us. I didn't rush to explain, didn't rush to defend. "They said you were a problem, a burden." Still, I waited. And then she added, like peeling back the final cover on something she'd always suspected, "But you were the one paying our mortgage, weren't you?" I turned my face slightly toward the garden path. A blackbird hopped between the rosemary branches. The air smelled of earth and pine. For 17 years, I said. Steady, quiet. That house was in my name the entire time. They didn't know that until after they'd thrown me out, and by then, I had already transferred it to the community trust. Sophie exhaled again, this time with a sound that was part disbelief, part grief. Why didn't you say anything? My voice came gently, because saying something wouldn't have changed the way they looked at me, and I was tired of trying to teach people who were committed to misunderstanding me. We sat in silence again, but it was no longer a silence of distance. It was shared. Sophie ran a hand through her hair. She looked down at her hands, pale and small in her lap. They lied to me. I didn't respond. She needed to say it, to hear it aloud from her own mouth. It wasn't my place to shape that moment. It was hers. I always wanted to believe Mum. I thought she just needed more support. She did, I said. But she wanted it from people who praised her illusions, not those who challenged them. Sophie nodded. Her lip trembled, just barely. And then finally, the tears came. Not dramatic, not sobs, just quiet streams that made no sound. She wiped them without shame. I thought I was just like her. But I think I might be more like you. I turned toward her. That's not a compliment, she said quickly. It's just a fact, and facts are hard to carry. I smiled, not with triumph, just a small smile that reached only halfway. It's all right, I told her. The hardest part isn't being like me. It's surviving what people do to people like me. Sophie looked up. Her eyes searched mine. Were you ever going to come back? No, I said, calm and clear. I had nothing left to come back to. I built something new. And now, here you are. She shook her head. I wasted so many years thinking you were the reason Mum drank, that you were toxic. I used to avoid your name. You did what children do when they're fed one version of a story. She wiped her nose with the sleeve of her sweater. For a moment, she looked like a child again, a girl sitting on a park bench, realizing the world had lied. I didn't reach for her hand. I let her be. She finally said, I don't know what to do with all of this. You don't have to do anything, I answered. Just carry it gently. Let the truth settle where it wants to. And when you're ready, you'll know what part of it belongs to you. The sun had begun to lower. The garden lights clicked on. A soft amber glow settled across the stones. Inside, I knew Eleanor was finishing up. Guests would be gone. Denise and Howard would either leave or vanish into the corners of their own shame. But out here, something else was happening. Sophie stood up, brushed the leaves from her skirt. Can I stay here for a while? You can stay as long as you need, I said. The room upstairs is warm. Fresh sheets. She nodded, her voice softer now. Thank you. And then, after a pause, she added, for everything. As she walked back toward the house, I remained on the bench. The wind moved the rosemary again. The blackbird returned to its perch. And for the first time in a long while, the stillness did not feel heavy. It felt earned. The house emptied slowly, not with chaos or slammed doors, but with the eerie hush that follows a thunderstorm. The air inside had shifted, heavier in some corners, lighter in others. Howard and Denise had left first. Neither looked at me as they passed the parlor, each clutching their coats like armor. No apologies, no justifications, just quiet, as if their presence had evaporated into embarrassment. I didn't stand to walk them out. Eleanor had remained in the kitchen for most of the hour after Sophie and I returned. She had brewed a pot of jasmine tea, the kind we used to drink when she first moved in with me. When she finally entered the sitting room, she held 2 mugs, no words. We sat across from each other. She placed mine on the small table between us and folded herself into the old armchair by the window. The fireplace had died down to its embers. I didn't bother to add more wood. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had just witnessed something sacred and cruel unravel side by side. Something necessary. Eleanor took a sip, then looked at me with those sharp, thoughtful eyes of hers. She said softly, "Truth never walks in clean, but it leaves the air breathable." I nodded once. She set her mug down gently, fingers wrapped around the base as if grounding herself. They didn't even try to deny it. Not once. "Because they couldn't," I replied. "Not in the face of the ledgers, not in front of Sophie. There was nothing left for them to twist." She leaned back, her legs tucked under her, eyes scanning the room. "You know, I always thought Denise was the smart one, but she's just careful. There's a difference." "She's cunning," I said, "but she lacks depth. And when people like that are exposed, they fall fast." Eleanor tapped her fingers against the ceramic of her mug. The rhythm was slow, thoughtful. "And Howard. All that money moved through him and he never once asked where it came from. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to know. That was his favorite thing," I said, settling deeper into the couch. "Passive blindness. He thought if he stayed quiet long enough, he could outrun consequence." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "And Sophie?" I took a breath. A long, full breath that stretched out my chest and pressed against the years I had swallowed in silence. "She's not like them. Not anymore. Maybe she never was. But now she sees the wreckage they built around her and dares to look straight at it." "She didn't argue," Eleanor said. "She didn't explain. She just listened. Because deep down, she knew." The fire cracked softly in the hearth, one ember shifting to the edge of collapse. Eleanor leaned forward. "There's something else. About tonight. About the way you handled it." She paused, then continued with a steadiness that made her voice land like soft hammers. "You didn't humiliate them. You didn't throw your power around. You just showed them the truth. That takes more restraint than most people have. And it takes more dignity than they ever gave you credit for." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Not because I disagreed, but because the truth of her words was like balm and salt at once. She smiled, almost reluctantly. "I've spent most of my life believing justice had to be loud, that it had to crack bones and shake walls. But what you did tonight, Lillian, that was a different kind of justice, one that sticks." I looked down into the tea, now cold. The scent still clung to the air. Jasmine, calm and persistent. "They'll try something," I said, finally. "A new angle, a softer lie, a version of the story that makes them the victims." "Of course they will," Eleanor replied. "But the damage is done. You reclaimed the ground they thought they buried you under." A pause. "So what now?" "Now," I said, "I go upstairs and take off this dress, and tomorrow I plant daffodils along the southern fence. I've been meaning to." She grinned. "That's it?" "That's it. Truth, then tea, then flowers." She raised her mug in a quiet toast. To truth, tea, and flowers. We didn't say anything else. I climbed the stairs slower than I had earlier in the day, not from fatigue, from weight, the kind of weight that doesn't hurt, but reminds you you're alive, that your bones still carry stories. The hallway was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the sconces. I turned into my room, hands reaching behind my neck to unclasp the necklace Sophie had stared at earlier. Then I saw it. On the corner of my bed, propped against the pillow, was a folded note. Small, cream paper, my name written in Sophie's handwriting. I sat down gently before opening it. Grandma, I don't know how to undo what's been done. I don't even know if I should try. But I do know this. I saw you tonight. Truly. And I am sorry for every year I spent seeing you only through their eyes. You don't owe me anything. But if there's a part of you still open to rebuilding, I want to meet you there. I left my mother's house tonight. I won't go back. I am not proud of who I've been. But I'd like to become someone you wouldn't be ashamed of. Thank you for not letting me drown in their silence. Sophie. I let the note fall into my lap. Outside the window, the garden lights still glowed, and for the first time in 16 years, I felt the door creak open, not just in my house, but in my chest. It was close to dusk when I heard the knock at the front door. 3 short taps, then silence. Eleanor was upstairs, humming softly in her room. The house had settled back into its natural rhythm after the storm. For a moment, I thought of letting the knock go unanswered, but something in my chest told me to open it. I walked to the door slowly. No rush, no dread. When I opened it, there he stood. Howard, alone. He wore the same jacket he had on the night of the party, wrinkled now. His hair wasn't combed, and his eyes looked tired. Not just from the night before, but from years. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me. I stepped aside, wordlessly. He walked in. The air between us was thick, but not hostile. There was no shouting left, no accusations, just the final threads of something long overdue. We sat in the sunroom, the same place where, a decade ago, I used to read aloud to Sophie when she was small. The light was fading, but I didn't turn on the lamps. Let it dim. Let it end that way. Howard cleared his throat. His hands were fidgeting, restless in his lap. I thought about what to say. Practiced it in the car, he began, but none of it feels right now. I waited. He looked at me again, his face drawn. You never deserved what we did, not any of it. I know, I said. My voice was calm, not forgiving, not cruel, just sure. He swallowed, the sound loud in the quiet room. I don't know how I got so lost. Denise. The money. It all felt like momentum, like something I couldn't stop once it started. You had choices, I said. You made them. He didn't argue. I never stopped missing you, he said, even when I tried to pretend otherwise. I just didn't know how to come back from the damage. I looked at him for a long moment. The boy I raised was still somewhere in that face, buried deep under the man who stood silent for too many years. You didn't come back, Howard. You came to collect, over and over. You came for favors, for forgiveness you hadn't earned. But you never came just to sit with me, never came to ask about my days, my health, my hopes. He nodded, his face stiff. You're right. A long pause. Then he added, softer now. I saw the way Sophie looked at you, like something cracked open in her. I think she'll be different now. That's her work to do, I said, not yours. He gave a sad little smile. I won't try to justify anything. I wanted you to know that I remember who you were before everything. Before Dad died. Before Denise. I remember the woman who made waffles on Sunday mornings and read Sophie poetry under the willow tree. I remember how you used to laugh before you learned to flinch. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it rise. She's still here, I said quietly. You just stopped looking. His eyes glistened. I thought maybe... we could rebuild something. I held up one hand gently. No, not anymore. His mouth opened, then closed. You're not the villain in every story, Howard, but you were in mine, and I lived with that long enough. He looked down. I'm not angry anymore, I said, but I've built peace out of silence, and I won't trade that for noise again. He nodded, slow, accepting. I stood. This is the last conversation we'll have, I added. I wish you nothing cruel, but I also wish you distance. He stood, too, shoulders slouched. He looked older than he had just moments ago. As he turned to go, he paused by the door. You were always the strongest person I knew, Mum, and you were always capable of more than you chose. The door closed behind him. Outside, the last light of day folded into dusk. I stood in the quiet for a long time, then turned back toward the hallway, letting the stillness settle like dust in the corners. That chapter was done, not slammed shut, not torn out, just closed, finally. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of turned soil and damp grass, the kind of morning that made you breathe a little deeper, not because anything special was happening, but because everything was finally quiet enough to notice. Eleanor had started her routine early. I could hear the soft hum of the kettle in the kitchen and the rustle of newspaper pages as she folded them back, column by column. There was a rhythm in our days now, one that asked for nothing and gave enough. Outside the window, the backyard looked exactly the way I had once imagined it during sleepless nights in that old apartment above the laundromat. The fence was repainted. The flower beds were full. The old magnolia tree, once strangled by neglect, was now blooming proudly, branches spread wide like arms in prayer. It had been months since the party, months since the inheritance flipped the balance of my life. Since the family I once called mine revealed their teeth and walked away without shame. Since I had to speak truths I never thought I'd say out loud. And now, silence. Not empty, but earned. I stepped onto the porch, wrapping my shawl tight across my shoulders. The breeze brushed my cheeks, and for the first time in years, I didn't brace myself against it. I welcomed it. In the corner of the yard, Sophie knelt in the soil, planting new seeds where the petunias had wilted. She didn't say much, just worked with gentle care, pressing the earth down like it was something sacred. Her visits weren't frequent, but they were steady, and they were hers, not prompted by guilt, not arranged by anyone else. She brought her own tea bags, her own questions, her own awkward silences, and I let them come. Today she brought packets of wildflower seeds, said she wanted to give the bees something to celebrate. As I watched her from the steps, I thought of the girl she used to be, the way she'd chase butterflies with a paper net and fall asleep curled on my lap during long road trips. I thought of the version of her that stood frozen behind Denise at the mansion, and the version that returned with red eyes and trembling hands, too ashamed to speak. But the woman I saw now was neither. She was growing, like the garden. She looked up and smiled, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "They're supposed to be bright oranges and blues," she said. "I thought your yard could use something wild." I nodded. Wild was good. Wild meant alive. Later we sat in the shade with lemonade and let the sun fall through the trees without chasing it. Eleanor joined us, her laughter folding easily into ours. The three of us didn't talk about the past, not directly, but in between our sips and glances, it lived there, tamed, unarmed. When Sophie left that afternoon, she hugged me longer than usual. No promises, no apologies, just presence. Inside, Eleanor placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You built something good here, even after everything." I looked around, not at the house, though it stood tall and solid, not at the money or the contracts or the documents stored neatly in the safe. I looked at the light, the quiet, the absence of fear. "I built myself again," I said. "That's what matters most." She squeezed my shoulder and nodded. That evening, I sat by the window as dusk settled like soft wool across the lawn. The porch lights flicked on automatically. The breeze carried the faint scent of lavender and wet wood. I didn't feel the urge to reach for my phone. Didn't need music or noise to fill the air. I was full already, not with triumph, not with vengeance, but with space, with room to grow, just like Sophie's wildflowers. And in that space, there was no room left for anger, only clarity and peace. If this story touched something deep in you, take a moment before you go. Have you ever rebuilt your peace after betrayal? Have you found your voice in the silence? I'd love to hear how you turned your pain into strength. Share in the comments. And if Lillian's journey reminded you of someone you know, or of yourself, don't forget to send them this story. Thank you for listening.